Multiplayer games are a thing to be nurtured. Games live and die all the time as they depend on both the developers and players to keep it running. Without both, the game will falter and die out. Shattered Horizon was created by FutureMark Game Studio, which was founded in 2008. It was a branch from the Finnish company FutureMark Studio, which was founded in 1997. Now known as UL Benchmarks, who are unsurprisingly well known for the benchmarks. The game would go on to be made on an engine created by themselves, since they already had engines for benchmarks. For example, 3D Mark, as shown here. This meant that Shattered Horizon would also be one of the first games to be released for DirectX 10. One of the problems was that this decision restricted the game to be on Windows Vista only. At the time, most were content with Windows XP due to how infamous Vista had become. Given that it was running on a benchmark engine, the game had high requirements for the time, meaning not a lot of people even had the hardware to run the game. The game was released on November 9th, 2009, with only 4 maps, which left the players wanting more features. From 2009 to 2011, the game received 3 major updates, containing more maps, weapons, and single player, before going silent. In 2012, the studio was sold to Rovio, another Finnish studio that's mostly known for the Angry Birds franchise. In 2014, the game was removed from Steam, as FutureMark wasn't able to support it anymore. But you were still able to purchase it from the sewer for a time, until they also removed it. Even the official Shattered Horizon website is gone. It redirects you back to the UL Benchmark's current website. Now the only way to get the game is through various third-party websites. So what is the game like? Shattered Horizon is, or was, a sci-fi multiplayer-only first-person shooter, with a focus on freedom of movement in a zero-G environment while looking pleasing in the visual presentation. Since the game was created using a benchmark engine, the overall visuals still look decent. It feels like you're playing a benchmark, albeit a dated one, instead of simply watching it. While some stuff can look dated by today's standards, it's still an impressive presentation. The textures don't look that fresh anymore, and the lighting, being a key factor of the game, looks great, even though the shadows aren't that smooth. To help give the visual effect of outer space, the background is constantly moving, giving the illusion that the environment is traversing through space and simulating a planet's natural rotation. The actual gameplay is fun to mess around with, although it takes some time to get used to the movement. As the developers said during an interview, they wanted to create something that hadn't been done before. The movement allows the player to move around in zero-G with ease and fidelity. While you move normally using W, A, S, and D, you are able to turn yourself around while holding the right mouse button or using Z and X, as well as allowing you to align and land on almost every kind of surface by pressing F. One problem with the movement could be the low FOV, as you're able to move very quickly in any direction. It could potentially make people nauseous. One of the unique features of the game is what is called a silent run. It allows you to hide from the minimap as well as hide your thrusters lightly, which essentially makes you almost invisible to anyone not paying a lot of attention, thus enabling you to ambush unexpected enemies. This is of course not without its own downsides, as your movement is severely limited due to your thrusters being turned off and gravity affecting you more. Plus, your surrounding sound is almost non-existent. This feature would most likely have been more useful against other players, as bots rarely seem to care whether or not you're in silent mode, but I could be wrong. The only other example of a game that had similar freedom of movement would be Space Engineers, but the core gameplay in that focuses on something quite different. In its current form, the game features 8 maps, 4 from launch and 4 from an update. On these 8 maps, you're able to play 4 different game modes. Assault, where you take turns to defend and attack a series of capture points. Battle requires you to capture all the points in order to win. Skirmish is your standard old team deathmatch. And Last Stand, which is a co-op or single player mode where you and up to 3 players fight against waves of enemy bots. The 4 game modes feels too similar to each other and would have been interesting to see what other kinds of modes that could have been added to the game had it received more updates. While there are community servers, as mentioned by the developers, they are more or less dead. During my playtime, I saw nobody on these 2 servers. Single player is just multiplayer against bots. Their difficulty ranging from very easy to very hard. Teams are up to 16 players, 32 players in total. The bots are quite consistent and goes for the objective and acts very well. They are exploitable, however, as you can mow down multiple bots in a matter of seconds, even on very hard. The soundtrack for the game was created by Markus Kalonen, a member of the Finnish rock band Poets of the Fall. It fits well into the game and sounds amazing. Not only does it sound like a cinematic soundtrack, booming with trumpets, preparing you for the upcoming battle, but at the same time the more silent parts of the soundtrack makes you reflect on space and the environment. It sort of makes you feel smaller in the grand scheme of space. The sound effects in the game makes an effort to make you feel as if you're in space. The ambience gives off this feeling of floating in the vacuum of space. It is quite immersive. Of course, in real life, there's no sound in space, but since it's a game, some freedom was made. For example, if you enable the silent mode, you will hear almost nothing except your breathing and heartbeat. All other sounds are almost silenced or very muted, which would not happen in real life, but it's a good representation of space in a video game nonetheless. While you are able to hear sound, it's more or less explained that your suit gives off an audio simulation, which replicates or enables sound to be heard, while in the meantime still sounds as if you were in space. Since it's a multiplayer game, the story is never hugely focused on. What we have is a backstory to set up the universe, and the details of each mission is presented during the loading screens for each map. Much more than that is not present. The backstory of the game is as follows. Shattered Horizon is set in 2049. Humanity is back on the moon, this time led by large companies trying to reap huge profits. However, this leads to the largest mining accident in history. An explosion throws billions of debris into orbit around Earth, leaving the moon fragile and unstable. The fragments of the moon settles around Earth and becomes known as the Ark, based upon the shape the fragments formed. Due to all the debris now surrounding Earth, the chance of a rescue attempt is faint, leaving thousands of people stranded in space. On one side, the International Space Agency, or ISA for short, consists of astronauts and scientists trapped in the battered International Space Station, whom now are given the task of apprehending those responsible for the catastrophe. Weapons are among the last supplies sent to the station before the supply line to Earth is cut. Meanwhile, the Moon Mining Cooperative, or MMC for short, finds itself facing serious charges after only barely surviving the cataclysm. Cut off from Earth, they see the ISA as a threat for their very existence. The two sides are drawn into an armed conflict. Desperate battles are fought over strategic locations and the scant supplies from Earth that make it through the shroud of debris. Control of the Ark now means the difference between survival and death in the cold depths of space. So in conclusion, what happened? Perhaps one of the reasons for its failure was because of its bad launch and its high hardware requirements. First impressions are important, and it could potentially be the reason why not a lot of people picked it up afterwards. Another reason could be the lack of features. While the game received updates and fixes, compared to other multiplayer games at the time, it was still lacking. A third reason could have been the fact that it was made by a studio only known for their benchmarks. It could have been that most people didn't even know about the game in a time where multiple games were released every day. Or it might have been overlooked due to it being released 6 days before Modern Warfare 2. It was perhaps too large of a project for the studio's first game. Despite how fun the gameplay is, as well as how good it looks, you can't hide the fact that it is still lacking in content compared to other multiplayer games. It's sad to see a game with unique features like this die out, but without both the support from the developers and players, the game was bound to die. Now close to its 10-year mark, it's not long before it completely fades away. My name has been Alexander Larsen, and thanks for watching.